July 1941, Riga. The German army has entered Latvia, advancing east in Hitler's war against the Soviet Union. The Red Army has fled, leaving behind chaos, dead bodies of the political prisoners, and fear. Into the power vacuum created after the Soviet retreat step the German occupiers, who immediately seek helpers among the local population. In a former Latvian police headquarters, an SS officer interviews a young lawyer and former police officer named Viktors Arājs. Arājs is ambitious, eager to please, and willing to obey. Arājs is authorized to form a Latvian auxiliary unit to assist the Germans in their murderous campaign. Within weeks, his men will become known as the Arājs Kommando. They will not only police occupied Riga, but also round up and murder Jews, communists, and Roma people, leaving tens of thousands of dead over the next 3 years. However, their crimes will not remain unpunished. The Second World War started on the 1st of September 1939, when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. When the Germans arrived in Riga, the Latvian capital, after their attack against the Soviet Union in June 1941, Viktors Arājs was quick to offer his services. The occupiers were looking for men who could mobilize local helpers, and Arājs presented himself as ready to act without hesitation. Viktors Arājs, who had previously become involved with right-wing nationalist groups, was not a brilliant thinker, but he possessed a certain energy and ruthlessness that the new occupiers needed. The Germans needed collaborators. Their plan in the newly conquered Baltic states was not only to defeat the Soviets, but also to begin Hitler's racial war in this territory. Jews were to be rounded up and destroyed, and for this, the SS wanted locals who spoke the language and knew the terrain. The man in charge of this task in Latvia was SS Brigadeführer Franz Walter Stahlecker, commander of Einsatzgruppe A, the infamous Nazi death squad. He met Arājs and gave him the task of creating a Latvian commando unit that would assist in anti-Jewish actions and the murder of the Jewish civilians. Arājs quickly found volunteers. Many were young students, fired up by nationalist anger and anti-communism, which was supported by a brief but brutal occupation of the Baltic states by the Soviets. Others were opportunists, men who sought power, money, or revenge. Some were simply drawn by the chance to wear a uniform and carry a weapon. Within weeks, the Arājs Kommando numbered several hundred. They were supplied with rifles, armbands, and German backing. From the beginning, their main duty was not conventional policing, but direct participation in the killings of members of the Jewish community in Latvia. On the night of the 4th of July, 1941, the Arājs Kommando carried out one of its first major crimes. In Riga, tens of Jews were hoping to find shelter in the Great Choral Synagogue. The commando set the building on fire, with people trapped inside. Other synagogues across the city were attacked, set aflame, and destroyed. Jewish men were dragged from their homes and executed in courtyards. The murders were made public, meant to terrorize the population. Survivors remembered the black smoke rising over Riga and the smell of burning buildings and bodies. It was the beginning of a campaign of extermination of Latvian Jews. During the summer of 1941, the Arājs Kommando continued to hunt Jews in Riga. Groups of them were rounded up on the streets, accused of being traitors, communists, or Red Army supporters, and marched to the outskirts of the city. There they were forced to dig pits and shot. Hundreds were killed in this way each week. The pattern was repeated in other Latvian towns. Men were separated from their families, driven to the woods, and murdered in mass graves. By the autumn of 1941, German leaders had decided to annihilate the Jewish population of Riga entirely. The Arājs Kommando was given a central role in this plan. On the 30th of November 1941, the first major massacre at Rumbula forest near Riga took place. At dawn, German police and Arājs men drove columns of Jews out of the Riga Ghetto, which was created just a few weeks before. Women, children, and the elderly were forced to march through the freezing streets toward the forest. Guards beat those who stumbled. Anyone who could not keep up was shot on the spot. At Rumbula, pits had already been dug. Victims were stripped of clothing, forced to surrender valuables, and herded toward the edges. Groups of people were made to lie face down in the pit with the bodies of previous victims, and then shot with machine guns. The massacre lasted all day. Survivors later described the chaos, the crying of children, the barking of orders, and the sound of continuous gunfire. The Arājs Kommando acted as guards, and they were sending the victims into the pits, ensuring that the columns were moving steadily. The process of murder was repeated on the 8th of December 1941. Over the course of these two operations, about 25,000 Jews were murdered. The Commando also took part in the mass killings at the city of Liepāja, in western Latvia, near the Baltic Sea. Jewish men, women, and children were rounded up and driven to the dunes by the sea. German soldiers and Arājs men forced them to undress after they were lined up at the edge of open pits and shot. German soldiers photographed the murder scene, producing some of the most chilling images of the Holocaust. Families waiting for death, bodies falling into sand, rifles aimed at naked figures. Survivors recognized Arājs men among the executioners. These were only the largest massacres. Across Latvia, the Commando carried out mass shootings in towns and villages such as Jelgava, Valmiera, Daugavpils, and many more. Jews were rounded up, marched to the outskirts, stripped of belongings, and killed. Often the victims included Roma families and people accused of being communists. By early 1942, the Jewish population of Latvia had been almost entirely annihilated. Of the roughly 93,000 Jews living in the country before the German invasion, about 70,000 were dead. The Commando's crimes extended beyond Latvia. In 1942 and 1943, they were deployed in Belarus for so-called anti-partisan operations. These actions were often campaigns of destruction against entire villages. Homes were burned and civilians were shot on the spot. Witnesses described whole communities erased in a single day, their residents buried in shallow graves. The Commando, experienced in organizing mass shootings, proved valuable to German officers who wanted rapid, decisive action against both resistance fighters and civilian populations suspected of helping them. Thousands more perished in these campaigns. Some individuals from the Commando became notorious. Herbert Sukurs, once a celebrated Latvian aviator, became deputy commander of the Arājs Kommando. Survivors recalled him driving trucks filled with Jews to execution sites, pistol in hand, and personally participating in the shootings. His transformation from national hero to war criminal shocked many. Konrads Kalais, another officer, took part in the deportations and shootings. Decades later, his name would resurface in international investigations. By 1943 and 1944, the war was turning. The Red Army advanced westward, and German power in Latvia faltered. The Commando was used more often in reprisals against partisans. Villages suspected of supporting resistance fighters were burned, their inhabitants executed. But moral decline and desertions increased. Remnants of the Arājs Kommando were disbanded, and at the end of 1944, they were merged into the Latvian Legion, or the Waffen-SS, the military branch of the SS. At the end of the war, some former members of the Commando fled west. Others who remained were captured by the Soviets. Though after the war accountability was uneven, in some cases justice, or even revenge, eventually caught up with the perpetrators. The Soviet Union tried the majority of captured commando members. Between 1944 and the mid-1960s, trials were held in Riga and other Latvian cities. Of 356 identified members, 352 were prosecuted. 44 were sentenced to death, and 30 persons were executed. Others received long terms of hard labor, usually 10 to 25 years in camps. Survivors testified about the burning of synagogues, the pits at Rumbula forest, and about the shootings on the beaches of Liepāja. These trials documented the crimes in detail, though many records remained hidden behind Soviet secrecy for decades. The leaders of the Arājs Kommando faced mixed fates. Herbert Sukurs fled to South America, but he met his fate in 1965 when agents of the Israeli Secret Service, Mossad, lured him into a trap near Montevideo in Uruguay. At first, they wanted to kidnap him, but he resisted too much, so they killed him on the spot and left his body, together with documents outlining his crimes and responsibility for the murder of 30,000 people. Viktors Arājs, the leader of the Arājs Kommando, escaped Soviet capture and lived quietly in West Germany under a false name. In 1975, he was finally arrested and died in prison in 1988. Many lower-ranking members spent years in Soviet prisons. Some were released after serving their sentences, returning to lives of silence in Soviet Latvia. Others disappeared abroad, blending into exile communities. After Latvia gained independence in 1991, some who had been convicted were controversially rehabilitated, despite the weight of evidence against them. The Arājs Kommando was never large. At its peak, it numbered around 1,500 men. Yet with German direction and local knowledge, they destroyed almost all of Latvia's Jewish community and took part in massacres in Belarus. They burned synagogues in Riga, shot thousands at Rumbula, executed families on the beaches of Liepāja, and wiped out villages across occupied territory. Their actions turned Nazi ideology into bloody reality. When the war ended, little remained of Latvia's Jewish community. The few who survived, hidden by sympathetic neighbors or carried east into the Soviet Union, returned to shattered homes and stolen livelihoods.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.